Right, good afternoon ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to 4 Hamilton Place for those of you who haven't been here before. My name is David Chin. I'm the President-elect, which means I'm the President next year, so I'm here today in actually the first time I've been standing here, which is quite interesting. So we're going to start off with the housekeeping. So let me get to the housekeeping in my notes. So what we're saying, so there are no fire alarms expected, so if there is a fire alarm, it will be a real fire alarm, and the exit is through the front, and the meeting point is beyond the Intercontinental on Piccadilly. So if there's a fire alarm, it's a real one, get out, go to the corner of Piccadilly. If you have any mobility issues, please make yourself known to the staff, and there will be assistance provided. Please do not leave any unmarked bags around, otherwise, I won't say they'll be blown up, but they'll be removed. Please switch your phones to silent, which I'm just about to do as well. A good reminder there. After the presentations, there will be an opportunity for questions, and there will be a drinks reception later on at the end of the event. So that's the housekeeping. Right, in terms of this event, if I'm correct, this is the second event of this sort, the inclusion event at Hamilton Place. So welcome to this event. The idea is to make the Aeronautical Society a welcoming, inclusive space. It's also an education event, and I'm very glad to be here. I think the thing that I've taken away from my exposure to this group is that everybody has their story. I'm here as an ally. I'm also a mentor to one of the speakers, Eli over there, which is why part of the reason I'm here. And it's very much about inclusivity stories. The reason I know Eli is that I'm dyslexic, and it gets quite personal. I mean, being given a bunch of notes to read at the beginning is sometimes a bit intimidating. I don't care now. I used to care. But I can still smell the polish on the headmaster's floor where I used to do my reading test when I was in junior school, which I hated. So it's just a personal story. So I think it's all about stories. It's all about inclusivity. It's about making, in particular, this building, this organisation, Hamilton Place, a welcoming, inclusive organisation that is, hopefully, your home, the home of all the aerospace community. And if that isn't so, speak to me after the event in the reception, because that's what we should be. I'm not going to dwell on, because this is really about your stories and trying to figure out how we can do things better here, because I think we are trying, and certainly Richard there has been chairing this for some time. I think the society does make an effort, but we can always improve. So if you want to talk to me quietly afterwards how we can improve, that'd be great. And I think with that, I'll leave it to Zach. Where's Zach, who's going to be the last ceremony? Zach, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, there's a lot of computers up here. For the AV, could you switch the screen? I think this is the other presentation. Got it? Great. Ooh, got to reconfigure here. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me and EPAN, European Pride in Aviation Network, here at the Royal Aeronautical Society for the second year in a row. It's always a great event, and there's definitely some new faces and some familiar faces, so welcome, and let's see what the day has in store for us. It's not, there we go. So before I begin, here are a few things I'd like to point out. I would like to preclude that by saying I have done this presentation with the best of my ability. I thought it would be easier to talk about the topics I chose in a more organized manner, only to find out that it's extremely difficult to find the correct order when they all have to do with each other. I'm neither a professional speaker, nor am I a scientific researcher, nor do I have a PhD in diversity management. I may also often say aviation, but please bear in mind, I also actually mean aerospace at the same time. I travel with work on a daily basis throughout Europe and the world and work with people from different cultures, backgrounds, and languages. One tends to notice that one thing may be okay to say in one place, but maybe not so much in another. The definition of politically correct differs from place to place. In that sense, I do sincerely apologize if someone's toes feel stepped upon, or if I say something that may sound inappropriate or even discriminating. And as we all know, D&I knowledge, tactics, and best practices are ever evolving. So let's treat this room today as a safe space where we can all learn from each other. That being said, if anyone would like to carry on this conversation afterwards, away from the stage, feel free to approach me after the event or contact me. And finally, before I get started, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Zach. My pronouns are he and him. I'm originally from the US, but have lived in Germany since I was 18. And my day job versus my gay job, and I do believe that this terminology might have actually been coined in this room last year. My day job is a pilot at a cargo airline based in Germany, flying the Airbus 300. For the Airbus and Boeing in the room, the Airbus 300 was the best Boeing that Airbus ever built. My gay jobs are vast and various. I am, most importantly for today, the co-founder and president of European Pride in Aviation Network, along with a member of various working groups, such as the German Pilots Association, the European Transport Workers Federation, and the EU Commission for Diversity in Transport. I'm also a diversity representative at my own airline and a member of my airline company's group's LGBT network, RainbowNet. Today, I would like to give you a general overview of the state of diversity in the European aviation industry, where we'll dabble in the term of intersectionality, what we're doing as a network and an organization and what we're trying to achieve. And lastly, we'll hear from one of our volunteers and members, Nishant, who brings in his individual perspective and his own story on his intersectionality experiences, and he will also introduce you to a project we are currently working on. A status quo is a report on the current state of affairs, so we'll take a quick look at what's going on in our industry in a brief general overview. But what this is definitely not a TED Talk, nor will I rattle off random statistics and not go in to show graphs and pie charts. Lastly, this is not a D&I course, as I will assume that most of us in this room have some basic understanding of the concept of inclusion and diversity. When I suggested this topic to talk about, I was a bit more convinced that there would be more substantial information to make a case and create a presentation. Little did I know there was not. There are studies and research out there, but most of it is tailored to the US aviation market, and most of the research focuses on female statistics. Many of the dimensions in D&I are not even measurable or simply aren't visible, partly due to GDPR and data privacy laws. Companies aren't necessarily allowed to ask your sexual orientation, your social background, migrant background, etc. And it's actually nearly impossible to make a study on the entire industry, aviation and aerospace. If you just think about alone, aviation has airlines, MROs, manufacturers, airports, air traffic management. Aerospace has defense and military. Apparently they don't work on Fridays. And manufacturing, to name a few. I do, however, want to talk about the change we are seeing. All we have to do is, to get this overview, is to watch the news, read the headlines, or follow along on social media. But what is change? Change implies making either an essential difference or a substitution of one thing for another. This could be positive, but this could also be negative. So it's not all good and not all bad. So let's take a look at the headlines. For example, this past year, we've seen NASA sending the first woman and a first person of color to the moon. But at the same time, anti-woke organizations are bashing airlines on huge billboards in the US for their diversity efforts. We see the world-famous Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in DC dedicating a series called Queer Space, featuring stories and people at the intersection of aviation, space, and LGBTQ history and culture. At the same time, we see airlines canceling their partnerships because they wish their customers Happy Pride Month. We see airlines adapting uniform policies, making them more inclusive and gender neutral, allowing their employees to express their true selves. But at the same time, we see transgender pilots being grounded and fighting to get back in the sky with a very unclear outcome. We see airlines changing ticket booking systems to allow ticket bookings irrelevant of your gender. And at the same time, we see newly elected leaders of airline pilot associations being forced to resign after publicly posting anti-LGBTQ and misogynistic comments. And finally, we see airports introducing gender-neutral bathrooms and even security screenings, keeping their passengers in mind. Yet, we see former astronauts being caught favoriting transphobic tweets. There are things, however, that we don't see. We don't see, for example, companies updating internal policies. Actually, when I say we don't see it, that maybe sounds wrong. We just don't see it visibly. It's happening. So we don't see companies updating internal policies, such as gender-neutral operating manuals in airlines and maintenance facilities, or adaptation of gender-neutral language in company communications. We don't see the D&I roundtables HR managers, leaders, and representatives are participating in, or conferences they are attending. We don't see the immense increase in internal employee networks and ERGs all across the industry. We don't see the educational lunch sessions on Zoom that talk about various aspects of D&I offered to employees. And we don't see the inclusion awareness training that middle management is receiving. So what is the industry doing? There are various campaigns at international levels in the industry, such as the 25 by 25 campaign by IATA. We see conferences happening, such as the Aviation Inclusion Summit or this previous Global Aviation Gender Summit that took place in Madrid this year. There's roundtables and networking, such as this event, cross-industry working groups, such as the working group with the Royal Aeronautical Society and Fraser-Nash, the Diversity in Transport initiative from the EU Commission, which covers actually all of the transport sector. And we see commitments and change in strategy in companies. During my preparations, I stumbled across an article by Shannon McLaughlin Morrison from Ohio State University called Moving Beyond Representation, Reimagining Diversity and Inclusion Efforts in the Aviation Industry. She tries to get an overall view of the efforts in the aviation industry, albeit, again, primarily in the US, but a lot of what she talks about can be applied here as well. She's also a bit critical of what some companies are doing, but I'd like to remind you all that there are for sure companies that are truly trying to make change. She confirms that statistics on other underrepresented groups such as people of color, LGBTQ+, remain challenging to identify due to said difficulties with GDPR and statistics. She explains, despite marketing campaigns during affinity months and notable success stories, the aviation industry still grapples with the challenge of achieving genuine diversity and inclusion. The paper argues that to make meaningful progress, the industry must move beyond symbolic gestures and engage in conscientious reflection on the experience of minoritized individuals. A few years ago, let's take a look at an example. A few years back, an airline wrote about their first female captain of color. This groundbreaking achievement was highlighted and celebrated, rightfully so. On one hand, using her success and hard work as their measuring stick for successfully supporting D&I efforts. However, her promotion to captain was actually not the result of any institutional or organizational change that airline had to make. It was the result of a seniority-based system that has been in existence for years. The airline was able to claim the captain as a success story without having to investigate the organization's climate and culture, which made her the first. The invisible aspects lie in the systemic factors contributing to her promotion, while the hypervisible aspects include the symbolic nature of her achievement and the industry's visible efforts during affinity months. Examining both dimensions is essential for a comprehensive understanding of diversity and inclusion challenges within the aviation industry. The author contends that current D&I strategies often focus on representation without addressing the systemic issues of racial, gender, class inequality, etc. While hiring chief diversity officers, forming employee resource groups, utilizing affinity months for marketing purposes may make the environment more comfortable for those already in the industry, they do little to transform the culture and ensure broader access for underrepresented individuals. The paper challenges the industry's tendency to celebrate diversity without critically examining why it is necessary, urging a shift toward a more profound understanding of the challenges faced by underrepresented groups. While acknowledging positive changes within the industry, the paper underscores the necessity for a more profound commitment to inclusivity. Mere increases in representation without a concurrent focus on changing the culture and addressing systemic challenges are seen as insufficient for creating an aviation industry that is truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Through my own experience, I've managed to come up with a bunch of hot topics that I see relevant. A few of those would be pink washing and rainbow washing. I'm sure that's a familiar term, underscoring the importance of genuine allyship and advocacy beyond surface level gesture. Polarization is often a topic referring to the division and disagreement among individuals, often stemming from differing viewpoints or political ideologies. D&I discussions can also be hindered by complex or academic terminology, making it challenging for broader audiences to engage, audiences that may not be so familiar with the topics. Simplifying language enhances accessibility, ensuring that everyone can understand and participate in these meaningful conversations. The absence of diverse role models and representation can perpetuate stereotypes and limit aspirations. Emphasizing the importance of diverse representation showcases the variety of pathways to success and inspires individuals from underrepresented groups. And when D&I discussions only engage those who already support the cause, we tend to call that preaching to the choir, there is limited impact. Expanding outreach beyond like-minded individuals is vital for creating widespread awareness and fostering understanding across diverse perspectives. So why does it matter? Studies are beginning to prove, which is words on paper versus what we already know, the link between safety, including psychological safety, and its impact on flight safety. Environments where people feel valued, supported, or at least respected promotes effective communication, teamwork, and decision-making, which are all crucial components for ensuring flight safety. This isn't just in airplanes, for example. Let's take a mechanic. That mechanic needs to feel safe in their environment to be able to concentrate on the tasks at hand and so as to avoid making any mistakes, also playing a crucial role in flight safety. Then we talk about productivity, innovation, and shortage of skilled labor. That's nothing new. We all know that a diverse group of employees will help solve that problem. So what's it take? Actions to words. Actions to words. Let's stop talking about it and actually start doing it. We need more representation, more role models. Having a workforce that reflects the diversity of our society encourages individuals from underrepresented groups to pursue careers in aviation and fosters a sense of belonging. We need more upstanders and allies. We need to change company culture and start educating from a young age. So what's getting in the way? Historical bias and discrimination, misinterpretation or lack of understanding of the concepts, lack of representation. Quotas is actually here a triggering word sometimes. So the absence of diverse leadership can be a significant hurdle. While quotas are currently often a very hot topic, resulting in very polarized views, ensuring intentional efforts to diversify leadership is also crucial for breaking down barriers. Outdated tech systems, for example, make it impossible for employees to change their gender or pronouns in the systems. Accessibility barriers, polarization, unequal resource allocation, and the already mentioned insufficient data. So I attempted to make a graph of the big picture to try to explain who's actually involved in making change, who's talking about diversity, who's putting thoughts to paper. The original graph that I came up with actually would have shocked all of you if I put it in a slide, so I tried to simplify it, and this is what I came up with. If we take a general look at it, we have different levels. We have the international level, we have pan-European, national, industry, and we have NPOs. Yeah, okay, so as I said, it's a bit difficult to stay on track with these topics because they all have to do with each other. So right now I'm going to jump into the topic of intersectionality briefly. The definition of intersectionality, the term was coined over 30 years ago by Kimberly Crenshaw, a professor in the US. It was originally intended to, in the context of social justice. She argued that anti-racist movements were framed around black men while feminist movements centered around white women. Both movements overlooked the unique challenges faced by black women and therefore further isolated them. The term intersectionality has evolved since then, and it's actually finding wider use in the realm of D&I in all ways and forms. Intersectionality is therefore a concept that acknowledges individuals have met multiple intersecting identities such as race, gender, sexuality, that shape their experiences and create unique forms of privilege or discrimination. So we have to consider the complexity and diversity of individuals' lived experiences, acknowledging these factors. Going back to this view, I wanted to take a closer look at what NPOs are doing. So we have NPOs, for example, bear with me, it gets a bit confusing. NPOs that deal with diversity in general, that would be, for example, a Stonewall. Then we have NPOs that deal with aviation in general, such as the AOPA or the British Gliding Association. But we also have a bunch of diversity-related specific aviation organizations such as our organization, EPAN, Women in Aviation, British Women Pilots Association, Airability, etc. So This was just a brief overview of what's going on in the industry. There are lots of organizations out there that are dealing specifically with diversity and inclusion within the aviation industry, so it's a bit niche. There are organizations dedicated to gender equality, anti-racism, sexual orientation and gender identity, physical and mental abilities, social background, etc. That list is by no means complete and in no order, and we do see, however, that a majority of the organizations that deal with diversity and inclusion in aviation are at the moment specifically relating to females and female identifying people within the aviation industry. So when we talk about the overlap, intersectionality, all of these organizations are dedicated to their certain niches, whether it be females, LGBTQ, abilities, people of color. But when we take a closer look, we see that there's a lot of overlap. We see that all of these organizations have something in common. They're dealing with discrimination, representation, unconscious bias, systemic barriers, mental health and well-being. And then we see these organizations, the specific ones, working on their own topics. For example, we work with the LGBTQ community, transgender. The Airability organization works on accessibility and people with different kinds of abilities. And we see organizations fighting against racism. So the idea here is to actually join together in the NPO world and come together and share the overlap, share resources, so that each organization has the ability to concentrate on what they do best and share the resources and learn from each other. So I wanted to talk quickly about EPAN, European Pride in Aviation Network. I actually have no idea how I'm doing on time. EPAN, our mission is to build, support, and unite the entire LGBTQIA plus aviation community around Europe and beyond. We are the official international partner of the NGPA, which is an organization that was founded in 1990 already in the US, and together we form a worldwide community. Who do we represent? We represent people from all areas of aviation from all around Europe. Obviously people outside of Europe are also welcome, but the name is European Pride in Aviation Network. So we have two sides of the organization. We have the community and we have the industry. So our community is people from the LGBTQ community, aviation professionals and enthusiasts, and allies are also welcome. So basically anybody that has an interest in aviation is welcome to participate and join and support us. We also work with the industry. So we work with aviation companies, airlines, flight schools, and the likes. We work with regulators and associations, try to come together, host roundtables, and we are able to also go into companies and support them, changing policies and supporting their employees. Our members benefit from a safe space, social network, events, career guidance, mentoring, mental health and well-being, industry discounts, scholarships hopefully starting next year, LGBTQ support specifically such as transgender, transitioning, HIV, and also members have the opportunity to volunteer with us. We have various committees and working groups, such as the just mentioned HIV committee, transgender non-binary committee, mentorship committee, volunteer coordination, scholarships, etc. So I invite you and your company to consider joining our network. There are various ways to join our network. You can join as a corporate member, you can join as a partner, you can join our roundtables, and you will have access to our network. There's possibility to also incorporate your employees into our network so that your employees can also directly benefit from us. So I invite you all to be a part of something bigger. We are now officially here with launching our first campaign for an aeromedical reform in the European aviation industry. So we invite you all to help us make some progress, and that'll be all for today. Thank you so much. I'm open for questions, or we can have a chat during coffee break. Thank you. Appreciate it. No questions are good questions.
Brilliant. So if there's any last call for any questions for Zach, he's going to sit down, and then you'll have to get him over a beer or a coffee or something else later, so that'll be fine. So I'm just going to unlock my laptop, one of the several laptops up here, so I've got something to refer to. Hello and welcome. Some people here know me, some people don't. My name's Luke Bonnet. I'm a senior business manager at Fraser Nash Consultancy. Some of you may know my company, some of you may not. I can talk about my company later on if you want to, but that's not what we're here for today anyway. So thanks all for coming. Myself and some colleagues are going to run a trans and non-binary inclusion workshop shortly. So we'll be covering some sensitive topics in this workshop, such as discrimination. It's important to approach these conversations as respectfully as we can. Zach referred to it as well. You know, these are some difficult subjects. I'm going to assume that most people have got some background knowledge, but please do ask questions. This is the most interactive element probably of today, outside the networking sessions and the social later on anyway. So please do pop your hand up, ask a question if you've got one. But similarly to Zach, we're volunteers, we're not experts in diversity and inclusion, just engineers at the end of the day, but with some knowledge and background, so we'll be as helpful as we can. Questions can pop up, please just raise a hand, and we'll get to the questions and try and answer them as best we can. We're planning to record the session as a resource in future. So it's great that we've got so many people here in the room. It's brilliant to see so many lovely smiling faces. This will be recorded, and we'll do a check to make sure I'm not being too babbling and everything. But then this can be available as a resource for your companies, for colleagues in the industry, and we're going to try and create some more resources and everything in this space so that the companies that don't have budget, that don't have availability, aren't close enough to London and everything, can still get some benefit from events such as these run by the Royal Aeronautical Society. It's important to acknowledge that we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different opinions. What might be obvious to you might not be obvious to somebody else. So we'll try not to assume too much, but to be as helpful as we can. I just realised that I've not been moving the slides on. So I'll introduce at this point, after my welcome, which you'll see on the screen in a second. I'm very organised, me. My co-presenters. So firstly, Eli May, who will be speaking in a second, who is an apprentice at Defence Equipment and Support, a long way through your degree now, and been an active member of the ED&I committee at the Royal Aeronautical Society for a while now as well, which is fabulous. So Eli will be up shortly. And Carl, one of my colleagues at Fraser Nash Consultancy, a very talented systems engineer, previously in the army as well. As a reservist or an active? A reservist. But no, the reserves are as important as the active service personnel. I'm ex-Air Force. Not everyone's good enough to be in the Air Force, Carl. Maybe one day. But yeah. So yeah, it's great to have such incredible colleagues up here facilitating with me very shortly. In any case. That's the welcome that I was reading to, so I won't dally on that, as it were. But an opening question from me, really. Why do you think we notice more people coming out as trans or non-binary today? People can call out from the tables if they want to, as it were, but it's something to reflect on. I was saying to my colleagues earlier that I served in Afghanistan in 2010. And I served with the first trans woman to be on active operations, and she dealt with a lot of nonsense out there, frankly. But it felt like by the end of the 6 months I was out there, that a lot of people in Joint Force Support Afghanistan had kind of got it out of their system, learned a bit, and moved on. Certainly I felt like, okay, maybe society is moving on. But then, certainly in the last couple of years, particularly but not exclusively around trans people and non-binary people, there does seem to be an increase in the noise and in the anger towards them, when, decades back, these are things that have been discussed, and it's felt like, well, maybe society should have learned by now. So we should never assume that, oh yeah, that's not a problem anymore. We should always be trying to be better and trying to provide support to our colleagues. Are trans people more visible today? I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that more people feel like they can safely come out in a country like the UK. Are there more positive trans role models? Hopefully, and hopefully we're going to be hearing from some really positive trans people today as well. Transphobia is rife, as I mentioned. But what I have seen in my own company, in society, in the city I live in, Bristol, is people being willing to stand up. I'm a cis straight man, so it would be easy perhaps for me to kind of sit back and just kind of go, oh well, I'm not transphobic, I'm not biphobic, I'm not racist, so I'm doing the right thing. No, it's not good enough in my opinion. I try to be anti-racist. I try and stand up against these kind of injustices when I see them, whether it's difficult or easy or otherwise. More people have a word for how they feel, perhaps. That ultimately, as society becomes more open and people understand these things a bit better, perhaps there's something that gives them a definition, gives them a lens through which they can view themselves in a new way that we didn't have as openly in the past. The internet, good old internet, and social media and everything. There's support networks, yes. Not all social media and the internet and everything is positive, clearly, particularly for when it creates groups that can be quite violent towards some of the people that we're talking about today. But equally, it does give the ability for somebody who doesn't live in a big, diverse city like London, Birmingham, Bristol, Manchester, etc., to have access to a support network. It's less acceptable to force it out of people. I do love a graph. I'm not going to bring the graph up, but I'll be happy to share it with people. So in the US, in the past, I think until 1920, you weren't allowed to be left-handed. I'm left-handed, so I would have been discriminated against, as it were. And it stopped being forced out of people. And there's this graph. They kept track of it, and suddenly the left-handedness in the US shot up. And then it stopped at 20% and stayed there forever. And I'm not saying that, oh, right, okay, so the number of trans, non-binary, LGBTQIA plus people in the world, in the UK, wherever, is going to shoot up and then stop somewhere. Well, check your privilege and what you think. Would that be a bad thing? Of course, but ultimately, the scaring about, oh, yes, everyone's going to be not straight anymore. Well, it wouldn't be a problem anyway, but probably we'll get to some kind of level, and the more people can feel like they can be themselves, certainly from my perspective, the better, frankly. I'm going to stop talking, which is always a good thing, because otherwise I just carry on and get Carl involved. I'll grab a microphone though, so you're not safe from me yet. There's a click at me.
Cool. So I'm going to run through some quick definitions. Like Zach said in the previous talk, language is a continuing hurdle in ED&I. So I've got my definition of these words, whether it's right or not, up for the sort of debate, discussion. As sort of caveated earlier, if you disagree with any of them, a lot of this terminology is very personal, and the way that people kind of interpret it about themselves, no hard and fast rules, but we'll do our best. So first one is transgender. So someone whose gender identity doesn't align with the sex that they was assigned to them at birth. I can't get through a slide without putting a bit of history on it. It's a character flaw, and I acknowledge it. The trans flag was designed by a US Navy veteran, Monica Helms. Next one, transsexual. This is now a bit of an outdated term. You might find some older members of the community still use it, but generally this term is sort of fading out now. Some people see it as outdated or offensive, so it's generally safer to lean towards transgender than transsexual if you're talking about this sort of thing. Trans man, so someone who identifies as a man but wasn't assigned male at birth, and the opposite, trans woman, someone who identifies as a woman and wasn't assigned female at birth. Non-binary, also there's flags in the corner, if you didn't gather, that's what's changing. So someone who identifies as neither wholly male or female, that's quite a big umbrella term, so there's things like genderqueer, agender, all that kind of stuff generally falls under the non-binary umbrella. Gender fluidity, again, another nice flag. As someone who doesn't say gender is permanently fixed, so they might feel more male on one day, more female on another, and kind of shift around a little bit. And then gender dysphoria, which is the medical term that trans people are diagnosed with before the NHS will let them have medicine. Starting to be phased out though, and people are starting to use gender incongruence, which is a little bit less medicalised, less implying there's something wrong with trans or non-binary people, because incongruence just means a difference with that. yeah, as I say, this is just sort of a grounding in terminology. It's not everything. There's a load more to it. And I'm going to hand over to Eli to go through the next bit.
Cool. So I'm sort of going to run through an activity based on myth busting. There's 7 common sayings that we're going to go about trans and non-binary people that are going to come up on screen. I encourage you to see if you know how true they are. Please do talk with those around you if you want. There's no wrong answer. Healthy debate is wholly welcome. Research has gone into this, but I want to make it clear, although we are presenting this, we're not experts. We're sharing information that's been researched from open sources. I want to be as open, honest and well-informed as I can possibly be, and I do this by sharing my experience as well as learning about others. However, I think it's important to understand that it is unfair for people of the LGBTQIA plus community or the allies to be armchair experts. And as well, with something that's constantly changing, there's always room for growth. So, the first myth is non-binary people are essentially all androgynous. So if you'd like to think about this myth, sort of think how true you think it is or things like that, share it with those around you. This is actually how we see it. So not all non-binary people appear androgynous. Just like everyone else, they can present themselves in a variety of ways. Does every man look hypermasculine? Does every woman look hyperfeminine? So appearing androgynous is a personal choice, and it can be interpreted in many ways quite individually to the person, and as a characteristic can be unique to each individual. We all have our own perceptions based on our identity, experience and how we're brought up, and I think it's important to say that non-binary people do not owe anyone the appearance of ambiguity for you to still use their preferred pronouns. Gender diversity is a modern trend in human history. So, like we've sort of said before about this perception that it's becoming more common, actually, and we'll touch on later with a slide on history, that trans people have existed for just about as long as we've had the tools to record it, and before then. Records they're not always been there throughout history, but we know back into the Roman times we use art as a record. Middle England we use written word as a record. There's not always a record, but we do know they've existed. It's long and complex, and Carl will be going into this on the next slide. So, a lot of trans people who have surgery regret it later. So, for this, I think the numbers say it all. I've recently gone through gender reassignment surgery myself, and for me, I honestly cannot put into words the immediate relief, the change in my happiness and confidence, and just the extra space I had in my head that's been created now that I feel comfortable with myself and how I present and how I'm perceived. And then if we look at this compared to other surgeries, the regret rate is actually tiny. So trans activism aims to give children access to estrogen and testosterone hormones. So hormones and surgeries are to remove changes made by puberty. So when you're a child, you have not experienced puberty yet. However, the only medical treatment possible for a young child is waiting until they are at the age of puberty and then temporarily delaying it until they're old enough to decide whether they still want hormones. Puberty blocker therapy, this is called, and actually it's used for a whole load of medical issues like early puberty, people who might be intersex and things like that. So it's a common medicine, it's safe, it's well known, it's a standard practice used for multiple reasons, and its use has just been expanded in the last few decades to help those within the trans community. A medication can have more than one use. So the NHS is rushing people through gender affirming treatments. So I have personal experience of this. I'm still waiting to be seen for my first appointment with the NHS, and I was referred in November 2020. In the last 3 years, all that I have received personally is an email acknowledging my referral. I have friends who have been waiting a lot longer than me, and I know the wait is still to continue. So waiting lists can be up to 6 years long. I know people who've actually waited longer than that. And yeah, ask any trans person seeking NHS treatment how long they've waited or are still waiting. Using they, them pronouns to refer to a singular person isn't grammatically correct. So the Oxford English Dictionary traces singular they back to 1375 and appeared in the medieval romance William and the Werewolf. Since forms may exist in speech long before they're written down, it's likely that singular they was common even before the 14th century. Famous writers have used the singular they, including William Shakespeare, who used it in several of his plays, including A Comedy of Errors and Hamlet. James Austen's used it in Mansfield Park and Pride and Prejudice, as well as other famous writers, including Charles Dickens, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Emily Dickinson. It is used often, especially in spoken English, and a common example I've had is, so a flatmate says, "Oh, my friend's coming over later." I just respond by, "Okay, would they like to stay for tea?" This is because I don't know whether they identify as he or she, because I don't have that information. So you find that actually in speech you will naturally use they. I think on this as well, personally I care about how people speak and use language more than grammar rules that were written down and decided and regulated in the mid-1750s. And if you can make somebody happy by calling them they instead of he or she, why not do it? Trans people on hormones have an unfair advantage in sport. So, based on the limited data of trans people even being permitted to take part in professional sports, there is nothing to suggest they are better on average than other competitors. What we do know about sport is it is amazing for both people's physical and mental health. And the recent banning of people from engaging in sport across the board, based on this limited data from the professional level, has knock-on effects, as now trans people can't engage in the community game, a level where people just want to play with their friends, have fun, and get fit. So why, for me, this is quite personal, why do we use this small amount of limited data to basically ban a whole load of people from having fun with their friends and being physically and mentally well? So what you've hopefully realised from this list is a lot of sayings get thrown around online and in opinion media as fact, when in actuality there is little fact-checking done before people repeat them. Just a very basic level of awareness or research will let you know that the story isn't quite what it's made out to be. Going on from today, I hope you'll start noticing occasions where these things are said and not challenged, and you'll have the confidence to speak up. So now I'm going to hand back to Carl for a brief history lesson.
Yep, as I mentioned, it is a character flaw. There's a reason that I get wheeled out for all of these type of things. Just skip along so I actually have the notes and I know what I'm talking about. So my original request for a 12-hour lecture series and the exam at the end was denied, so I've got 2 slides and I will try and keep it as brief as possible. So we're going to start with a timeline of trans history. So we heard in the myths that there's this perception that being trans or non-binary or other gender identities is a new thing. We're going to start on the left-hand side with the kind of modern day, and we're going to work backwards. And the fact that there's an Egyptian sphinx on the right-hand side is probably a sign of where we're going to end up. 1990s to present, you've got the ballroom scene in New York. So a lot of transgender, drag queens, all that kind of thing. Being part of these big grand events, it's where things like RuPaul's Drag Race, all that kind of thing stemmed from. So this, and sort of modern slang that I'm not cool enough to use, all that kind of thing. So that's kind of current day, roughly accepted in certain circles. Stepping back a little bit, so late 1990s, we've got Leslie Feinberg, can't talk today. Publishes the book Stone Butch Blues, which is a historical fiction novel, but it addressed a lot of things around gender nonconformity, sexual identity, transphobia, homophobia, all sorts of different things in that book. I haven't read it, but I'm informed that it is very good. Stepping back, so sort of mid-60s to early 2000s, Wendy Carlos was a musician, and she is kind of one of the leading people in synth music, techno music, all that kind of thing, really open about her experiences as a trans woman, and worked on a bunch of really cool soundtracks for really good films. So go and check those out and enjoy work done by a very cool person. Stepping back even further to like the Stonewall riots, so the launch of sort of the modern pride movement. Leading figures in there, trans women of colour, drag artists, people like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, who did a lot of campaign work and kind of supported people in those communities as well. Going back even further, so 1890s to 1960s, this is Alan Hart, who was a medical doctor, a trans man, was the first trans man to undergo a medical transition in America that was properly documented and logged and managed by medical professionals. And he had the idea of using X-rays to diagnose tuberculosis. So picking up the signs early enough that you could treat it, because if you leave it for too long when the signs become obvious, it's too late to treat, or it was in the sort of late 1800s. And he is credited with saving literally countless lives. Tuberculosis still kills hundreds of thousands of people, but his work made it so you can catch it earlier and increase the treatment rate. Another cool trans man, again a medic, a doctor, was James Barry, the military surgeon in the British Army. So he went through an entire very illustrious military career, rising up to like Surgeon General, like top of military medical sort of heights. Performed the first recorded caesarean section by a European in Africa. The by a European is important because, as ever, the indigenous people had been doing it for ages before we got there, and then we tried to claim credit for it. Gave explicit instructions on his death that he be buried in the bed sheets that he died in. No one was to look at him, and sadly it was ignored, and they discovered that he was assigned female at birth following his death. So not a great end to the story, but otherwise a cool person. There's the Public Universal Friend, so 1750s. This is a Quaker preacher in America who kind of gave up their name, any gendered pronouns, assigned gender at birth, all that kind of thing, and became a cool sort of campaigner on abstinence, which is less fun, but free will, women's rights, abolition of slavery, so all of that good stuff. So, as ever, trans, non-binary people being generally good people throughout history. It's cool. Elagabalus was a Roman emperor, by all accounts, not a very good one. But you sort of switched between male and female addresses, promised great wealth to anyone who could perform cross-sex surgery on them, and kind of, in the modern day we'd call them sort of either gender fluid or trans, but obviously this was like a couple of thousand years ago. Those terms didn't exist at the time. And then the last one that I'll talk about on this slide is Hatshepsut, and I definitely pronounced that wrong, who was a pharaoh in ancient Egypt. And they took on all the masculine titles. They wore a woven beard to be able to be seen as a sort of powerful ruler and follow the examples of previous pharaohs. As far as we know, no one asked them to do that, and later female pharaohs didn't. This seemed to be a personal choice that they wanted to be perceived and addressed as a man rather than a woman. But again, this is like 3,500 years ago, so we don't know exactly why. And also, for some reason, someone went around and defaced all their statues and temples after they died. But that's quite, well, that timeline was quite Western. It was quite kind of our culture. But this map, I won't go through every point because we would be here for hours. And again, I've been told I'm not allowed to do that. But there are, each of these dots is essentially a community or a peoples that had some form of transgender identity, non-binary identities, third gender kind of experience within their traditional cultures. So in North America, you've got things like Two-Spirit people within Native American cultures. South America had some sort of third gender, non-binary type identities. Southeast Asia, there was a culture that had 3 biological sexes they recognised of 5 genders, which I think is really cool, that there was already that distinction between sex and gender. at that point, and yeah, just all over the world, wherever you look, trans and non-binary people have been there forever, and they will be there forever. I will now shut up about history and hand back over to Eli about sources of information.
So this is again sort of something to consider and to think about misinformation and hearsay surrounding the trans community, which I've personally observed or experienced in the media, online, and even my local community. So I'm going to bring up some resources. This is sort of to just encourage thought and discussion around this topic about thinking twice before believing misinformation as fact. I'd say many of us, probably, well, I think everyone in this room are reasoned or scientific thinkers. We probably work with complex arguments and evidence every day. And that will stretch to the outside of work life as well. But when people are like scrolling through social media or news sites, this doesn't always happen because it's very easy to just click culture, move it on, write something and forget about it. And actually, these things stay on the internet forever and impact real people. We all change our viewpoints. I think it's part of being human to expand our viewpoints, change with time. And there's no shame in admitting that we may have been wrong or should have sought more evidence. It makes us sort of reasoned, credible thinkers. So, of these 6, I'd just like you to think about what you would trust and what you might question or want to delve into more research before believing what it said. I personally think there'll be 3 from here that I would think are reliable. And for me, that is your workplace diversity champions. It's because they've probably gone through training, they may have unique experiences, or have worked with people who have shared their experience. A trans colleague in the office, this is first-hand, original sort of experience sharing, primary resource, if you could say. And then Stonewall, the charity for LGBTQIA. They will have the sort of background knowledge and experience. The other things are sort of very much focused on the media, online, and how actually where people don't question or research properly, it's all about just getting words out there. So to question these and to research yourself is always good practice. I'm now going to hand over to Luke.
I walk so far away. Thank you. So I think it's important to note on that last slide as well. As you mentioned, like there's different reliability and sources you can get, and up there was like if you've got a trans colleague at work, maybe you could speak to them about their experience, but they don't owe that to you. Please be respectful and everything as well. I know there's plenty of LGBTQ plus people in my business who don't get actively involved in the ERG, and that's fine also. They come to work. So nobody owes you their time, and if you wouldn't go up to a cis person, a straight person, and ask them quite deep personal questions, then maybe question why you would be doing so with a trans colleague, with a gay colleague, lesbian, etc. Okay, so it's just something to bear in mind. They would be a good source if they are happy to talk to you about that. Always make sure that you're gaining consent to have a conversation in this sort of space. So I'm going to do some more scrolling. Up here we've got an identity activity, which I find really, really interesting personally. So if you go to genderbread.org, there's a model. It's sometimes used to help teach primary school age children about gender identity. So hopefully it's a good sort of level for the people here in the audience as well. And I've discussed this with my own kids. I've got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. Just from my own personal perspective, I've said I'm a straight cis man, but on this scale, there's lots of things that I've done around raising my children that not that long ago would be, oh, that's women's work, or why are you doing that? That's your wife's job. certainly the things that my dad didn't do when he was when I was younger, as it were, and that was to do with how society treated him versus my mother in terms of going back to work and all the rest of it, pay disparity, getting back to intersectionality. But I would be seen as having a far more female role by an older lens than I would think is I would think is rather nonsensical personally through my own view. So even somebody who, as I've said, I'm an ally, but I'm a straight bloke. That's what I am. I still have various bits of the various lenses and the arrows that I would put myself along in different places. There is no all the way to the left, all the way to the right, unless you really do identify like that, which is also fine. I believe that Eli and or Carl were going to give their own views on this as an exercise, as well to show that different people are different at different points, and also you can take a snapshot and it's allowed to change. Certainly my views have changed as I've got older and maybe wiser. But yeah, Eli, you definitely said that you were going to talk about it,
So I think the key things here is the difference between identity, expression, anatomical sex, and sex assigned at birth. So for me, one that's quite clear cut is my gender identity. It's full on this way for the man, and all the way that way for the woman. Then my gender expression. This is something that has evolved. I think growing up trans, it's something I hid for a long time, and then when I sort of accepted it, all I wanted to be was perceived as a man. So my gender expression was very hyper-masculine. Since I've become more confident, I've actually played with gender roles, and happy to express feminine aspects and things like that. I used to just have a complete, really short hair, and now actually I'm kind of getting a bit of a mullet, and it's things like that, just with gender expression, that it will slowly change and evolve. And on this as well, anatomical sex. So this is to do with your sexual organs and things like that. I've obviously recently, as I've shared, had some surgery, so that is slowly shifting again, and it will shift further with surgery. And then the last one is all about sexual orientation. So this isn't necessarily linked to identity, expression, or gender or sex, but you may find that people who are within the T will also express into parts of the L, G, and B. All I would say is actually this has changed for me mainly because of my own confidence in myself and my expression and how I've engaged with my community locally. So I think the key takeaway from this is, and my key takeaway is actually that it's constantly changing, and I'm still quite young, so I may find it levels out at some point. It slowly is, but yeah, I just thought I'd share just to show how they can vary so much for an individual person.
Thanks, Eli.
Yeah, I won't talk for too long on mine, but yeah, as an example of how it can change, if you'd asked me in March 2020, that time might sound familiar to some people for a reason, I would have said that I was a straight, cis man. Yeah, there's some character growth through the pandemic. Because I grew up in a conservative household. It was very openly homophobic as I was growing up. So any kind of that sort of thought, all the way down, and then being locked in your house on your own for 3 months. Well, you got time to think, and that's been quite a journey for me of both in terms of sexuality and then gender. I've now been on HRT for like 4.5 months now, but my name is still Carl. I'm in no hurry to get to the end of that journey. So my gender identity is my gender expression is as you can probably tell, and HRT is doing its thing so that the right hand boxes are changing as well, and yeah, I think the point of it and what this shows as well is that it's not a binary, you're in this category, you're in this category. It can change, it can grow, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying that journey as you go through it and taking your time with it. So, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thanks so much, Carl. So, I'm going to be passing back to Eli in a second to discuss this question. But yeah, you can see it up on the board there. So again, have a think yourself. Eli, do you want to jump up?
So this sort of question is about how an identity might not make immediate sense to you. That doesn't mean it can't be. Identity is a very personal trait and journey, and it's that person's own feeling. It's important to them and should be respected even if you don't fully understand it. Within this, it's important to understand that terms don't need to be mutually exclusive either. So actually, this is somewhere I've really learned a lot, delving into the depths of the internet. So a key example I found was he, him lesbians. So a he, him lesbian is a lesbian who uses he, him pronouns either exclusively or in addition to other pronouns like they, them, or she, her. They may be butch, but not always. So it's just sort of, they're not mutually exclusive. You can't be one and then you have to be the other. Another term, butch, has been primarily used for masculine lesbians, but many butches are non-binary. A trans man can also describe themselves as butch. Another sort of mutually sort of A and B at the same time is trans people may decide not to medically transition for many different reasons, but that doesn't mean that they are any less trans. I think one that is more common is being bisexual, but people question this if you've mainly dated one gender or they've only seen you with one gender. And I think that's key to think that actually just because you are perceived as that, it doesn't mean you can't be the B. Masculine men can like to wear skirts. This doesn't necessarily mean they want to be seen as female or feminine. Kilts, people wear kilts, doesn't mean they're female. Kind of clothes and attire doesn't have to align completely with what you want to perceive as someone's gender. And also the fact that sexuality can change. This could be because someone's changed their gender, so someone might identify as a lesbian, go through gender transition and identify as straight. It could be that people generally just change what they find attractive as they grow older. It could be that people are recovering from conversion therapy practices, or that people just discovered more about themselves. So I think the key takeaway from this is the fluidity and to respect what someone's own identity is and what that means to them. It could mean something different to you, but you don't have to fully understand it. And this also can be easier to sort of understand when you move away from stereotypes.
You're up.
Cool. Practical things. We've talked at you for like an hour now. What can you do? What are some of the takeaways you can get from this? And hint, you're already doing something by being here. Even if you're part of the community, you can learn things, you can support better. If you're an ally, then showing your face, being visible at these kind of events is great. Don't ask people highly personal questions about stuff. Like I am listed in Fraser Nash as a person you can come and ask awkward questions to because I talk too much. But like Luke was saying, get consent for that conversation first. Don't just go up to a trans person and ask them about what's in their pants. It's weird. You wouldn't do that to a cisgender person. Please don't. Not that I don't think any of you would. Engaging with events and listening to experiences of others. So it's exactly what we're doing today. We've got some great talks about people's personal experiences and just taking the effort to come here. If you know someone isn't out to everyone, don't out them to others without their permission. So, don't go, "Hi, this is Carl. They're my gender friend." It's weird. It doesn't if they haven't mentioned it, don't make a point of it. Understand that gender presentation coming out has no instruction manual. Everyone does it in different ways. So, for me, I've started medically transitioning, but I'm kind of lazy and haven't changed name, pronouns, that kind of thing very much at work. I might do in the future. It depends on how I feel. And it will be different for everyone. Small acts of allyship, such as pronouns and email signatures on our teams if you feel comfortable doing so. If it is only the trans, non-binary, gender fluid people who have their pronouns in their bio, that's a really big flag that they are trans, non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. If everyone has it, then you just go, this is normal, fine. And it normalizes that behavior, and checking people's pronouns. A lot of people at Fraser Ash have like pronoun pin badges and that kind of thing, and just normalizing that so it's less weird when someone goes, what are your pronouns? Ooh. Be mindful of the barriers trans and non-binary people can face participating equally in society. So again, like there's a lot of scary stuff going on in the news at the moment for trans and non-binary people, especially coming out of America, places like Florida. If you see like the BBC has put up a really like dodgy article, or the Sun is going off on one again, maybe don't go up to your trans and non-binary friends and be like, have you seen this? It's like, yeah, we probably have, and we're not enjoying it. Or just check, if they look down, check in with them, make sure they're all right. And then, this is really important, realise that an honest mistake isn't the end of the world. If you get someone's name wrong, or their pronouns wrong, or you're not sure on a bit of terminology, do your best, and have an open mind if people want to correct you, or just say, I'm not sure about this, can you help? Like, what's a word I should be using? How do you want to be addressed? Anything like that. And if you screw up someone's pronouns, don't make a really big song and dance of correcting it. Either just move on or correct it quietly and move on. Like, don't be weird about it. That's the big takeaway from all of this, is just don't be weird about it. And I want to hand back to Luke.
Okay, so a bit of a self-reflection question that I'll put up there. So, we've talked a lot about trans and non-binary people through history all across the world. You may have friends who have come out as trans and non-binary. You may know trans and non-binary people, but if you don't, say if you're using this resource after the fact, you're watching on YouTube, just have a think about how you would respond. If a colleague came out to you as trans or non-binary, it's a bit of a mental exercise you can do. What would your initial response be? How could you respond positively? What really could you do to support them? If you're in a larger organisation, you probably do have trans and non-binary people in your organisation. If you're not sure, then maybe they're not comfortable coming out. What can you do as an organisation to make them feel like they can be welcome, to make them feel like they can be their authentic selves? What about a family member? You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to be one of several siblings or anything to know what it's like to be part of a family. What would you do? How would you respond? How would you respond differently to a loved one versus a colleague? Maybe you love your colleagues. That's fine also. It's just something to think about, and to hopefully take some strategies and some learning away from today to be useful in that situation. So I'm handing back to Eli now. There's a lot of chop and change on this, I realise.
So I'm just going to talk about some resources. So first is there's many charities that work to support trans and non-binary people. These include Stonewall, Mermaids for young people, Gendered Intelligence, Sparkle, Switchboard, Spectra. There's a whole host, as well as also local small charities that can offer support. A quick Google can help you find national and local charities and other resources of support. We have our own Pride and Allies group at the Royal Aeronautical Society, and we meet regularly and we welcome people of all backgrounds, whether identified as LGBTQIA or plus or not. You can find out more on the RAISE website or get in touch with one of our spokespeople. And then if you're looking for some further reading, one book we'd recommend is Trans in Britain, Our Journey from the Shadows. This was compiled by Christine Burns, and this book goes over the experience of several trans people and their struggle to be seen and heard over the last few decades, as well as the sort of euphoria of being able to be yourself. So gender euphoria is the opposite of gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, that was spoken about earlier. I think I also just want to share a quote from GLAD, which is another charity, and it's that just because you've never heard about these identities before does not mean that those identities have never existed. Having to explain your identity and essentially make an argument that you do in fact exist is extremely emotional and mentally laborious. If anyone takes the time to explain their identity to you, make sure to not take that for granted and thank them. Also, you don't need a full understanding of anyone to use their correct name and pronouns. Even if, in the moment, you don't understand someone's identity, you can and should still use their correct name and pronouns. I'm now going to pass back over to Luke.
Okay, so just a bit of a chance for some self-reflection. Have you learned anything today? Hopefully, maybe, possibly. One thing that you'll do as a consequence of the workshop today, one thing you'll do differently perhaps. Recommendation from me, that there's a podcast on Allyship, which again I will have pronounced wrong, but the You're Dead to Me podcast is on BBC Sounds, so you just have to pretend you've paid for a TV licence and you can get access to it. If you've paid for your TV licence, all the better. But there's actually quite a lot in that series that look at more diverse people throughout history. Like the presenter has a rule that he doesn't go over the Tudors because it doesn't just look at bits of history that everyone's seen before. So if you're kind of boring like me and like a historical podcast, then get into it. I would say. So before going to any questions, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Carl and Eli. Really put themselves out there today. Some young people being incredibly articulate and really, really great in their presentation. So I appreciate if you could show your appreciation for them. And with some examples of some people in public life who have been open about being trans or non-binary there to show that trans people, non-binary people exist. They're out there, not going anywhere. They've been there since prehistory. Are there any questions? Is there anything else anybody would like to discuss at all? We've covered it all. I thought so. Oh, go on. Yes, David. Thank you. Yeah, go on. Right, we'll do the roving mic. Go off. Are you still recording? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Really appreciated it. Really, really, really interesting. And I've made a few notes that has got me thinking. The Society has an international outreach. And if we're looking at some very different cultures, there are very different views of what you're talking about. So have you considered different views internationally of how this sort of thing plays out?
Yeah, so absolutely, and I think Zach touched on some of those themes as well. Certainly, some of his kind of news stories and everything. Like different cultures have different approaches to the West. I'll put up the air quotes as it were there, and it's possible to educate people and to support your own staff and your own colleagues whilst also being respectful of other cultures. They are not mutually exclusive things that you can do, and there's policies you can put in place as a business to make sure that you're protecting your colleagues. That a lot of things just need to be covered by health and safety ultimately. So if it wouldn't be safe for somebody who is openly or visibly perhaps LGBTQ plus to travel to a certain country, then probably don't compel them to travel there. But if you're going to preclude somebody from potential career progression just because of who they are, and by making sure that they wouldn't be able to go somewhere where they could be unsafe, then again you need to figure out how you make sure that just because of who somebody is, you're not potentially going to have a detrimental effect on their career at all. So it's not easy at all, David, I would say. There's work that I've been involved in my own company to look at this. I think we're going to get into some of these issues with the panel later as well. So I'll let the leaders of our industry give their opinion on it as well. But the key thing that I would say myself is that they're not mutually exclusive. It's possible to support colleagues from LGBTQ+ backgrounds and also engage with parts of the world where it's outlawed and move in a positive direction. It will be in many people in this room's lifetime, certainly in my own military career, that you weren't allowed to be out in the military. And just a matter of weeks ago, I was at the Defence LGBTQ+ Awards. Kelly Holmes was there. It was amazing. It was one of the most fulfilling experiences I've ever had to feel myself in a community like that, and for it to be so positive, for everyone to be so happy, and for it to feel normal. It felt normal to be at a defence event surrounded by out people and their allies, and for it not to feel tokenistic or anything. It was just part of the fibre of what the military is now, and we need to do more in society so that that kind of positivity does become something that is more global from my perspective. Any views on that?
Is that what? I think I would just like to add to that we can often put people in a box based on where they live, where they grew up, how they grew up, and not actually know that that's not the only thing building on their experience and their life. People have interacted with multiple people, and I've found, even in terms of just like in the defence industry, I've had certain thoughts or feelings which have been completely made untrue. I have felt completely comfortable living on a Navy base, for instance, and that was something I was a bit apprehensive about. And so I think the key takeaway from that is, yes, there's what bigger beliefs for different types of people where they were brought up, but we actually all are human, and we do have that connection, and to not let those beliefs get in your way and to just start understanding each other through shared experiences and just spending time with each other. I think you'll find that a lot of those barriers are made out because it's language and words, but actually when you get down to integrating with other people, they're not there as much. I'm not saying that you will still have people with very strong beliefs, but I'm saying that as a culture, not everyone will be the same way, and you'll have a lot more things that will connect you human to human that will matter much more.
Any other questions from the floor? We've got one over there. Right, I'm gonna do the roving mic. Yeah.
Thank you. Regarding terminology, I have a question that... hello? Is this still working? Okay, there we go. I had to speak a bit louder. The word butch, let's take this as more of an educational experience. It reminded me of a conversation I had a while back with an older gentleman who felt offended when I used the word queer. And nowadays we use the word queer as kind of, we took the word back, a word that used to be a very bad word back then in his generation. And I know personally the word butch as actually being rather demeaning. So would you be able to tell me, at least in reference to the British culture, is that a okay word to say now?
So these aren't my words, as it were. So yeah, thanks, Eli.
I think with words, butch, I've heard it used around in my community personally. I don't know whether, like queer, it's something that's being claimed by the sort of younger generation, but I think words like butch or equivalent like bear in the gay community and things like that, words change and like with sort of bringing they back, which was normal, and then in the 1750s it was then said no, it can't be singular, and then it's sort of coming back again. I think sort of the way to approach it is ask the person. If you hear the person use it of themselves, sort of respect that, and if you do feel uncomfortable saying it, or someone isn't comfortable with being called it or referred to it, that's fine. But having these healthy topics, healthy debates, knowing what people are comfortable with is sort of the way forward. And I think the way, unlike sort of the left-handedness, my perception of language is that it's just a sine curve and it will just keep going like that. And I think acknowledging that as well, personally, on sort of maybe the receiving end of some of descriptive terms, knowing that someone may not want to use that because they feel uncomfortable using it themselves, rather than someone feeling uncomfortable being identified as it. It's all about the sort of relationship between the people. And so if I know that someone's not comfortable using butch, then I wouldn't use it around them, kind of thing. But then I may, if I know someone likes being called butch, or if I wanted to be referred to as butch or bear or whatever, that I'd use that. It's just, I think, just very evolving. Yeah,
it's a really good question, and I think, whilst like I kind of said, these aren't my words. I'm an ally to the community. What I have done on various occasions, and there was an example literally this week. Lauren was asking, do we want to put LGBT plus, LGBTQIA plus onto some of the kind of the website details and everything. So I've got a really active community and Teams chat. Everyone's got their group chats and everything in their companies, hopefully. 50 plus people, and I was like, what term is better? And there were people that were like, just use queer, just use this, just the other. So I did just a flash poll, and it came back LGBT Q+, it probably got you covered, so that's what I emailed Lauren with. But just check. If you've got a community and a support network there, then that's the sort of question that hopefully you can feel empowered to ask. If you haven't got a community and a support network, then hopefully you've been exposed to some today that you can join, so that you do have that kind of network. And don't be afraid to ask questions, but just make sure you're asking them of somebody that's happy to be asked, I suppose. So thank you. Any other questions from the floor? We've got another one. The mic's almost there, so you're safe.
Hi. Question for Luke, I guess, mainly, and also thank you to all of you for that. That was really quite powerful and inspirational, so thank you for that. I don't think there's enough allies like yourself, Luke, at all. So how do you encourage people at a corporate level to get involved as an ally? What would you suggest? Like, what got you involved, I'd say?
So I've tried to be as active as I can and made it a bit of a mission for myself. But also that one of the main bits of that mission is to try and get other people involved. If you get somebody in the pub or whatever, as it were, and speak to them, they'll generally, not always, it should be said, but they'll generally kind of go, oh yeah, you know, people should just be allowed to live their lives. I've got no problem with gay people. I've got no problem with trans people and everything. Yet they won't necessarily take that step to be an active and an out ally, as it were. Leadership is really important. I'm relatively senior in my organisation. I've got senior in my job title, so I guess I must be. We're going to hear from some board members and some senior people in the panel later. I think it's so important for people in leadership positions to be open and visible and loud in their allyship. And you know, we're very lucky as an organisation to have a senior leadership team that have been really quite good. We've got executive sponsorship for our group, so the group isn't just there as like a fringe thing during lunch breaks or whatever. It's got executive sponsorship. It's part of the fabric of the company. Get things written down. Make it so that if the company needs to pass an audit, then it has to acknowledge these things and everything. And get yourself on the Stonewall top 200, 100, 1,000 it should be. LGBTQ plus positive businesses. There's a bronze, silver, gold award. My own business went through. I shouldn't be saying this, but we went through a check where we would shape up, and we're very close to bronze, and we're quite early in that journey. So we're going to really push and get over that boundary. But as somebody who's active and out as an ally, there's definitely more. I was nominated to be as Ally of the Year at the Defence LGBTQ Plus Awards. I didn't win, so there's definitely people that are better than me, right? But they are there, and it's this the way I've referred to it, and particularly in one of my kind of aspects of my identity as a veteran. If I can get the other veterans in my company, because they're a minority, but like quite a large minority, I think it's something like 20% of my company is veterans. Hire veterans, they're very good at their jobs. If I can get all of them being active allies, then there's nowhere to hide for people that aren't allies, and there's certainly nowhere to hide for people who are bigots. So the more people who are like, I'm going to stand up, and it's positive for their career. Being an active ally has definitely been positive for my career. I've had exposure to leadership teams. I can talk at events like this. I've got a really good excuse to network with people in my industry. And please do shut me up if I'm talking about engineering too much later. But yeah, what I say to a lot of people is that diversity and inclusion stuff within your businesses, whether it's your day job or not, whether it's the right thing to do or not, and of course it's the right thing to do, it's good for business. We work in an industry which is high technology. We need high quality staff. The more diverse we can hire from, the more talent we're going to drive into our businesses. If you don't have that senior leadership team who are vocal and visible about effective allyship, and who are themselves out as allies, as it were, then I'd say if you're empowered to do so, speak to them. If you're not, then join one of the networks like this, and you'll find some people who absolutely are. Hopefully that's gone some distance to answering your question. Thank you for asking it. I love talking about allyship. Any other questions from the floor? Please. Okay. Oh, there we go. supporting the
Hi,
community.
what do you think, it's a two-part question really, what do you think are the biggest threats to our community and what do you think are the biggest wins that we can achieve?
So, any views on that? I've just spoken for a while, as I tend to. Carl, you look like you're going to...
Yeah, as ever, I talk too much, so got to get a word in somewhere. Yeah, I mean, in terms of biggest threats, I think there is a very vocal minority who have a lot of power and have a problem with the trans and non-binary community for whatever reason. You know, if any day you go onto the website of like The Sun or the Daily Mail and you search trans or non-binary, there will be an article every hour on the hour about it. Like, there is just a deluge of just complete nonsense. Like, almost all of it, you read it and it's just fear-mongering clickbait that says nothing. And that, I think, runs the risk of kind of chipping away that... Most people you speak to about trans and non-binary stuff do not care. Like, there are some people who are active allies and want to get involved and help people. There are a small number of people who are actively against it, and the vast majority of people are just like, yeah, do whatever you want. But the risk of having these newspapers and kind of politicians spouting all of this rhetoric is that it shifts that window of where people think and what is acceptable to say and do out in the public sphere. And I think so that's the challenges side. In terms of the biggest wins that we can get, it's stuff like this. It's high-profile, established organisations or people or senior members of the industry or whatever coming out and going, that's not okay, and pulling that window back and going, look, no, act like a human being. Don't spout just this ridiculous nonsense that you've not looked up, you've not learned about, and you're completely unfounded. And I think that's where we can get our wins, is having enough people to counteract that lunacy coming from certain media organisations. That's my view. If Luke or Eli want to talk.
I would say the biggest risk, I think, is that at the moment it's very much about the people who are going through it putting themselves out there. As Zach sort of mentioned, the importance of role models, the importance of actually those people being open can help other people find the language that they need. And I think with the media and things like that, there is a risk that it becomes too much to be a role model and to speak up. It can be very draining, both presenting that way in public, but also the comments that you get online. And so I would say the biggest risk is losing these people as role models because they need to protect themselves. And so I think that's actually where allyship is really important, because you can have a support network around you to, when you're being open and you're getting hate, to keep you sort of positive and to sort of be like a sounding board of actually, no, this isn't true, or in the opposite way of like, yes, you can step back now and we'll keep the message going. So I think the biggest threat is almost kind of like that well-being side of the people putting themselves out there, and that as the rhetoric gets more in the media, the effect that will have on role models and how they will want to protect themselves. It is a question that I have in the workplace every day, kind of like, do I need to come out to anyone? Do I need to hide myself a bit? Luckily, I've had that question very rarely, kind of thing. I get it more in public than I do in my workplace, which is a huge win. But yeah, I think it's having the support around the people who are putting themselves out there so that they can continue to do it and provide inspiration and language to those who maybe have not experienced it yet.
Thanks, Eli. It's, one of the things that Eli said there really kind of sparked something for me as well, in terms of maybe a quick win. So some of us are here today are privileged to be parts of organisations that do have employee resource groups and internal pride groups and everything, where we're encouraged to kind of get together and everything. there can be a tendency sometimes to use these groups as a sounding board, or as free labour perhaps to help form policies and everything. And like Eli says, you don't want to burn people out. Like, there's a lot of stress on people with sometimes some of the things that are in the media and everything. So make sure you're not overloading them. But a quick win can absolutely be, if there's anybody that works in HR, certainly there's going to be some people from human resources and everything that come in as the panel later. When you've got some of that kind of groundswell of activity and input from a group like a Pride group, a Pride and Allies group, then crystallise that in a new policy. Change something for the better. Iterative changes that build up to more inclusive policies, to making people feel more included, are going to make people feel less exhausted because they know they're getting that support at work. So when the next thing pops up on social media, when the next extremely badly written thing comes up on BBC News or otherwise, other sources are available, they might be just that little bit less exhausted and able to come in and carry on doing their job and enjoying their job with people that are going to support them. So yeah, it's great to have these employee resource groups, but don't let all the great work that they're doing and workshops like this, hopefully, just then lie fallow, crystallise it, make a change. That's what I would say as a quick one. Any other questions? Right. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. Stay in touch. There's lots of ways to stay engaged with the Royal Aeronautical Society. If anybody wants to join the Pride and Allies group, then come speak to me, speak to somebody will point you in the right direction of somebody that's going to get you involved. And it is very much more the merrier. It's not like, oh yeah, we'll check and see if you're okay to join. Anybody can join, absolutely. The kind of the hybrid meetings and everything mean that it's a lot easier to be very inclusive these days, regardless of where somebody works and all the rest of it. As long as you've got an internet connection and an ability to download Teams or whatever, then you'll be able to join in meetings and everything. The next item on the agenda, unless I'm really way off the mark, is networking for a little bit. So you can all draw breath, do some personal reflection on some of the questions that we posed you, have a coffee if you're not past your caffeine o'clock to get some sleep at some point. But there will be refreshments back out in the area where we did some gathering earlier, I think. So thank you again so much for engaging, for asking questions, and for being here today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.